In my A Day in the Woods videos, we removed damaged trees from the forest. Today is when all those logs turn into boards. These days are always busy. The mill is able to produce lumber very quickly, so there's always something to do. Logs need to be brought over from the pile, offcuts need to be removed from the mill, and lumber needs to be stacked. It's really helpful to have 2 people present besides the mill operator. I've done it alone before and it's crazy hectic. We are working through 2 stacks of logs today. One stack is all cherry and the other is a mix of ash, maple, box elder, and some more cherry. There's around 60 logs and the mill started running at 8 a.m. This is Bruce and this is his wood-mizer LT40 sawmill. He charges a fixed hourly rate and brings his mill right to the logs. There are many independent sawyers all over. I'll leave a link in the description where you can look for a sawyer in your area. So let's look at the process of turning a log into boards. The hydraulic lift on the mill makes it really easy to get logs onto the log deck. Once it's up there, the hydraulic clamp clamps the log in place against the side supports. The goal of the first cut is to turn the log into a cant, which is essentially a beam. The first cut starts the process of removing the roundness of the log. The log can then be rotated 90 degrees and re-clamped against the side supports. The second cut is also waste. Since this second cut didn't meet the first cut, Bruce makes a second pass on this face, which produces a live edge board. We will set this aside for now and trim the edges off later. This fourth cut further removes the curvature of the log, and a second pass is made on this face, which produces a board with one live edge. The log is then rotated a final time and we place the live edge boards in with the log. Now the mill can run back and forth producing boards and edging the other boards from before. Now that the log is all squared up on 4 sides, it's called a cant. To make the offcuts easier to move around, we stack them on other offcuts that act as runners. This leaves a gap between the offcuts and the ground, allowing the entire stack to be easily picked up by the forks on the bobcat. They'll then get stacked on a couple of beams to dry for firewood. Since trees don't always grow straight, we were left with a bunch of short logs from cutting the trees into roughly 8-foot saw logs. Since we don't like to see this go to waste or turn into firewood, we still mill them into short boards and slabs, even though the yield per hour is much lower. The shorter of the short logs we have milled into 12-quarter with live edges. This makes the milling process go much faster since there are fewer cuts and the log doesn't need to be rotated as much. These shorter logs can sometimes be difficult to get clamped into the mill. You can see what's left of the pile of cherry logs at the upper right. This was about halfway through the day. Larger logs that contain a crotch, like this maple, we like to have milled into live edge slabs, preserving the crotch figure. In this shot, you can see the mill is also equipped with a debarker. This is a small circular saw blade that cuts a wide kerf ahead of the bandsaw blade, removing any bark and any dirt which would cause the bandsaw blade to get dull quicker. The Bobcat can lift about 300 board feet or so of wet lumber. So once we have that much lumber on a pallet, such as this pallet of shorts, we add straps and Jim brings the pallet into the barn. Another task that needs to be done throughout the day is the sawdust needs to be spread out so that the chute doesn't clog. The last batch of logs we were cutting here are ash, and I'm going to make flooring out of it. We started cutting these around 6:30 p.m. and kept going until it was past dark around 8:30. It's very noticeable how much harder ash is compared to cherry. The cut speed of the mill drops drastically. Since it was dark and I was exhausted when I got home, I waited to unload the truck until the next day. So as I mentioned, all the ash that we cut, I'm going to be turning into flooring. And I'm going to be putting that into the room that's above my shop here, which is our TV room / family room and my office. I've never made flooring before, so it's going to be I think it's going to be a pretty fun learning experience to see how that goes. Turning all these boards into tongue and groove boards that are all uniform size, and then it can become flooring. So those days are always really a lot of work, and this day was probably a little more work than usual. We were out there milling a lot longer than we typically do. Like I said, we started at 8 a.m. and we went until 8:30 p.m. and we just stopped for about an hour for lunch. So that's a really long day pulling boards off a mill. And as far as yield goes, it was a little low for this time just because we weren't doing anything really large. We got about 1,200 or so board feet out of the whole day, which really isn't that much. Normally we're around 1,500 to 2,000, but usually with those days we're milling logs that are a lot larger, at least 20-24 inches in diameter. This time we were more on like the 12 to 18 inch diameter, so pretty small logs. And we had a lot of little logs lying around still that we hadn't milled up from like a few times ago as well, so we're trying to get rid of all that stuff as well. So it was a lot of little stuff this time, which was fine too because we were really trying to get as much yield out of those logs as possible. Now with the bandsaw mill, there's one great way to get a higher hourly yield from your logs, and that's to add a second machine called an edger. And all the edger does is remove the live edge from the boards, so the mill, all it has to worry about is just slicing that log into slices, not worrying about the edging. And that reduces the amount of rotations that the log has to go through on the mill, which is what really eats up a lot of time there, is rotating that log and getting it into that cant. So with the edger, the mill can just make those slices, the slices can go to the edger, and the bar can be edged off really quickly that way. So that speeds things up quite a bit. So that's about it for me today. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at what it's like to be working at a sawmill for the entire day. It is a lot of work, but it's really rewarding, and it's really neat to be able to see all those logs that you pulled out of the woods get turned into lumber. And as you're pulling boards off the mill, you just can't help but to think, what are all the great things I could use this board for? What could this become? Because you can really see there's the beauty in the wood as they're coming off the mill. So thank you as always for watching. I greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions or comments about anything I talked about today with a sawmill or anything else here in my shop, please feel free to leave me a comment. As always, I appreciate those, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And until next time, happy woodworking.